Over the last year and a half or so, I've been giving a lot of thought, or some thought, I should say, to a concept that in my own mind, I think of it as safism, where we almost make an idol out of being safe and keeping ourselves from exposure to anything that might harm us. Now, obviously, there is some place for using good sense. You don't just jump off a cliff and hope you can fly, and so forth. But there is the possibility of exaggerating the importance of safety to the degree that we almost don't get anything done. In Proverbs, for example, there's this reference to the lazy man who says, I can't do anything outdoors because there's a lion in the streets. And of course, as long as there's a lion in the streets, that means I'm not going to be plowing my field, I'm not going to be planting, I'm not going to be harvesting. And so we have to be careful that we don't make a god out of an idol out of safety. Another example that I think we can all kind of relate to, I remember there was a really tragic event, everybody remembers this, where one of the space shuttles blew up on the way back from its orbital life, and as a result, I saw a cartoon on the editorial page of a newspaper shortly after, because there was a lot of discussion about whether we should even have manned space flight anymore. Perhaps we should do all our space exploration by using computerized, robotic kinds of space craft that would go out and do all the research and just simply radio back what they've learned. And so I recall the cartoon was of the old Conestoga wagons that the old settlers used to take across the prairies in the 1800s, and the Conestoga wagons had no one sitting and it was just, and the caption said something like, after a series of Indian attacks, it was decided that they would send out a number of unmanned probes into the prairies to find out what was actually out there and that kind of thing. And so, it just shows that our ancestors were willing to get on the most pitiful little excuses for a sailing vessel and cross the Atlantic in the winter just in order to explore North America, to go into the Arctic and explore there. And yes, some lost their lives, but some marvelous discoveries were made at the same time, because they were not worshiping safism. They were more interested in what they could achieve than they were in preserving their lives just a few more days or a few more years. I'm a race car fan. I know it may sound like I'm chasing a rabbit here, but I promise you I'm not. I love car racing, and I particularly love Formula One and watch it. It's the only sport I watch regularly. I watch it as often as I can. And one of the things that I've observed over the 40 years or more that I've followed this sport is that safety has changed the way racing is conducted. Again, I don't want people to die racing cars. I think safety on some level is the fact that the cars are so much safer now than they used to be, with crash protection built in from the sides as well as from front and rear and rollover and all that. That's great that we've got all this safety built in. But back when the cars were demonstrably unsafe, you had great racing, but when one driver went to pass another driver, he did his best to make sure that he was going to pass in a way that avoided contact with the other car, because he knew that not only could he kill the other person if he ran them off the road, but he would likely be run off the road himself and also die, because they had little or no safety, no seat belts, hardly any, even a rollover bar or something, they hardly had any of that. Now the drivers are much more aggressive, much more regularly banging into one another just to get a little bit of an advantage on the track, running one another off the track. This has been true now for probably 15 years, because the cars have become safe enough that they have that feeling, I can do it with impunity. I'll take the chance, and maybe I get rid of my opponent, maybe I succeed. Either way, it's not going to hurt that much. It just, we'll repair the car and race it again next week. And so I think that sometimes there can be too much safety, and in doing so, we become careless with our lives. And to bring this back then to the Christian area, one of the things that I think we need to understand is that there are places where we need to regularly be unsafe in terms of showing love to people who might be dangerous themselves, but we take the gospel to them. We need to be unafraid to go into parts of the world that are not friendly to the gospel, rather than saying, oh, they might hate me, they might kill me. One of the things that stands out about the 19th century, the 1800s, is how many missionaries literally packed their belongings into a casket that because they knew that probably before the year was up, they would be buried in that casket, but they were willing to go if they could give 6 months to the gospel in a country where they would probably die for having gone there. It was worth it to them, because as Christians, we believe that if we spend our lives in God's service, we're going to be with God forever anyway. And from the perspective of eternity, whether I live to be 40 or live to be 140, there's not enough difference compared to eternity to make it matter. And so I think we've got to learn to give ourselves more thoroughly to the cause of Christ than we have. There was a time 150 years ago when a wife might go through 3 husbands on the mission field. A husband might go through 3 wives on the mission field because of tropical illnesses and other dangers that lurked there. And they would lose the husband, he would die, she would die, the wife would die, but they would just carry on with the work. Children died, they buried them overseas and carried on with the work because their lives were in God's hands, and they felt that it would be better to spend their lives in His service than to preserve their life for themselves. And I have a feeling that that's exactly what Jesus had in mind when He said it's better for us to lose our lives rather than to lose our souls. And we've got to get our heads around that. Once again, we've lost the concept of giving our lives for the kingdom and for the gospel. And I think it's because we have exaggerated safety and the importance of safety to the point that it's become an idol. Absolutely. Well, yeah, and one of the ways then that safety, I think, has taken over the Christian world is the fact that we encourage our children from the earliest age to think about a university degree that will provide them with a safe life, a guaranteed income, or a guaranteed comfortable income. And maybe it goes all the way back to, I still recall my own grandmother, just to be honest with you, who urged my dad to get a government job because for her, the epitome of safety, of guaranteed income was if once you got a guaranteed job, a government job, you were set for life. And so there's no risk, if once you're working for the government. And so whether we're working for the government or whether we have a guaranteed income of some sort, and there's more and more interest in that just now, that's again a kind of a safism approach. But we're telling our children, become a businessman, become a lawyer, become a doctor, because this guarantees a certain lifestyle. And then we actually have seen parents who've become horrified when the child grows up and earns a degree in medicine, for example, and then says, but I don't want to spend my life just heaping money to myself. I want to turn this I want to become a medical missionary. And the parents melt down on the spot rather than saying, thank God, my child loves Jesus enough that she's willing to suffer for the sake of the kingdom and take their medical skills into a place where there are no doctors and where doctors are maybe not even hardly appreciated. He wants to do this for the kingdom's sake. She wants to do it for the kingdom's sake. And rather than supporting them with our prayers, we fall apart and act like they've done, like they've stabbed us in the back or something. And so we find ourselves then worshiping safety rather than giving ourselves to the kingdom and to Christ's work and allowing Him to hold our lives in His hand.